Alright, simplifying radicals with binomials in the denominator. And we're going to be using something called conjugates. So before we get into this, I want you guys to quickly FOIL these. The quantity a plus b times the quantity a minus b. Okay, if you remember, this is the difference of perfect squares. So if we FOIL this, we're going to get a squared minus ab plus ab minus b squared. And what happens is our two middle terms here will simplify, so you're really just taking your first term, squaring it, subtracting it by your second term squared. Okay, so your middle term comes or simplifies out, cancels out. All right, we're going to need that, use that in these next couple problems. So if we have x plus 3 x plus 3 times the quantity x minus 3, this simply just becomes x squared minus 9, squaring the first term, squaring the last term, keeping your minus sign in the middle. If we do the last one here, square root of x times square root of x is just going to be x minus radical 5 plus radical 5x minus 25. Okay, so again, just square your first, square your last, and put a minus sign in between. Alright, it's a nice little shortcut. Okay, so let's use these. Let's see how this applies. So our first problem is going to read 5 over 3 plus radical 5. Alright, so I cannot have a radical sign in my denominator, but this time I have a binomial in my denominator. So rather than just multiplying by radical 5, I'm going to multiply by the conjugate, which is going to be 3 minus radical 5. What I do to my denominator, I must do to my numerator. So 3 minus radical 5 as well. So I'm going to multiply my numerator, so I'm going to distribute this 5. 5 times 3 is 15, minus 5 times radical 5 is 5 radical 5. Over, again, this is going to be the conjugate here. So if you want to take that shortcut, I'm going to take my first terms. 3 times 3 is 9. My middle terms will simplify out, minus, and then the radical 5 times radical 5 is just going to be 5. So if we just do that out very quickly, 3 plus radical 5, 3 minus radical 5, okay, FOIL, I get 9 minus 3 radical 5 plus 3 radical 5, and then minus radical 5 times radical 5, which is just 5. My middle terms here will simplify out, and I'm left with 9 minus 5, or simply just 4. So if I simplify this, I'll have 15 minus 5 radical 5 over 4. Can I simplify anything else? Can I simplify anything with the numerator with the denominator? 4 does not share any common factors with 15 and 5. Always check for that. In this case, my answer is 15 minus 5 radical 5 over 4. Alright, so next example is 5 over x plus radical 5 versus 5 over square root of x plus 5. So I just want to show you the difference between these two, okay? They both look like binomials in a sense because they both have a plus sign in the middle, but one has just a square root over 5, one has a square root of the quantity x plus 5. Okay, so when you're simplifying these and you're rationalizing these, this one you're going to do the same way as we did before. You're going to multiply both of these by the conjugate, which was x minus radical 5. But this one here on the right, you're going to just multiply this by x plus 5. You're not changing the sign here. Okay, this is not. You're not using the conjugate on this one because the entire term is underneath the radical sign. Okay, so this is like a single term underneath the radical sign in a sense. So here you would still do the conjugate, so you'll get 5x minus 5 radical 5 on your numerator, and then my denominator is just going to be x squared minus radical 5 times radical 5, which is just 5. Versus here, which will be 5 times radical x plus 5 over, and then radical x plus 5 times radical x plus 5 is just going to be x plus 5. Okay, so I just want you to realize the difference here of the binomial when you use the conjugate and the binomial underneath the radical sign, you don't use the conjugate. So here we have 6 over radical 3 plus radical 4. So the conjugate here is going to be radical 3 minus radical 4. Multiplying both numerator and denominator by this. Okay. FOIL and distribute on top. So when I distribute, I'll have 6 times radical 3 minus 6 times radical 4 over radical 3 times radical 3 is just going to be 3. My middle terms will cancel out. Minus radical 4 times radical 4 will just be 4. So here I'll get 6 radical 3 minus 6 radical 4 over negative 1, which can simply be written here. If you want to distribute that negative 1, you can say negative 6 radical 3 plus 6 radical 4 as your final answer. So one minor correction here. 6 radical 4 is actually 6 radical 3 plus 6 times 2. So negative 6 radical 3 plus 12 should be your final answer. Alright, so 5n squared over negative 2 plus 2 radical 3n squared. I'm going to try to simplify this where I can. So I have 5n squared over negative 2 plus, I'm going to simplify this n squared here and say negative 2n radical 3. Multiply this by its conjugate here. So the conjugate will be negative 2 minus 2n radical 3. And both numerator and denominator by this. So if I distribute here, I get 5 times negative 2, which is negative 10n squared. 5 times negative 2n radical 3, which would be minus 10n cubed radical 3 over FOIL. Negative 2 times negative 2, which is going to be 4. Minus plus, my middle terms will cancel out, and then finally 2n times radical 3, so I have minus 4n squared times 3, just to show that. Simplify that, so I got negative 10n squared minus 10n cubed radical 3 over 4 minus 12n squared. Simplify where you can. So in my numerator, I can factor out a 2 or a negative 2 if I wanted to. So I can factor out negative 2 here and an n squared if I wanted to. So 2n squared, leaving me with 5 minus, factoring out negative 2, 5 plus 2n radical 3 over my denominator here. I can factor out a 2, and I'm left with 2 minus 6n squared, and here I see my 2 simplify, and I'll be that negative n squared times 5 plus 2n radical 3 over 2 minus 6n squared. So a correction on here, this should not be 2n. When I factor out the negative 2 here, this should be a 5n coming from this piece here. Alright, next example. I'm going to try this one a little differently. Of course, 3 times the square root of p cubed minus the square root of p. Simplify where I can. So I have 5 over, I can simplify p cubed, take out a p, so this would be 3p radical p minus radical p. Multiply by its conjugate, which will be 3p radical 5 plus radical p, both numerator and denominator, 3p radical 5 plus radical p. Radical p, sorry. Alright, and making that correction, and then distribute where I can. So if I just leave my numerator just the way it is, so 5 times the quantity 3p radical p plus radical p over, and I'll distribute this afterwards. This becomes 3p radical p times 3p radical p, which will just be 9p squared times radical p, so 9p cubed minus radical p times radical p, which is just p. And I could always try to simplify if I can, see if anything comes out. So from here, nothing else could come out of here. So this should just be 5 times 3p radical p plus radical p over. So this could be your final answer. Or if you want to simplify this a little bit more, you could take out a p from both of these, and you're left with 9p squared minus 1. And I would always check here if you can simplify anything else from what you factored out. So here we have 4 plus radical 5 over 4 minus 4 radical 2. So here, now my difference here is I have a binomial over a binomial. So this one's going to be just a little bit longer. So still multiplying by my conjugate. 4 plus 4 radical 2 and 4 plus 4 radical 2. Okay, so in this one I'm going to have to FOIL all the way through. So I'm going to bring it down here, equals 4 times 4, 16, plus 4 times 4 radical 2, 16 radical 2, distribute again, plus 4 radical 5, plus 4 radical 10. And again, I just distributed everything I just FOILed here. So 16 plus 4 radical, 16 radical 2, plus 4 radical 5, plus 4 radical 10. Distribute my bottom. I'll do this one in yellow. Bottom again is going to be a little easier. You're just going to square the first term. So 4 times 4, 16, minus square the second term. So I have 4 radical 2 times 4 radical 2, which will be 16 times 4. 4 times 4, radical 2 times radical 2. So I have 16 minus 64 in my denominator. Can I simplify anything in my numerator? Do I have any like terms in my numerator? Nothing, I don't have any same radicals, so nothing simplifies in my denominator, so I just have 16 plus 16 radical 2 plus 4 radical 5 plus 4 radical 10, and then finally 16 minus 64. So a little correction here, this actually should be 16 times 2 when I multiplied 4 radical 2 times itself. This should be 16 times 2 and my 32, so let's fix that. So then I have 16 minus 32 in my denominator, which is simply going to be negative 32. It's not, negative 16, excuse me. Not common to leave your negative 16 in your denominator. So what you could do with this one, you could just put the negative sign. You could either distribute through on all the numerators, or you could rewrite it so the negative sign is in the middle of your fraction. So 16 plus 16 radical 2 plus 4 radical 5 plus 4 radical 10 over 16. So all I do is just take this negative sign and I put it here in the front. And then whoever is reading it can decide to distribute the negative to the numerator, to the denominator, wherever they choose. So our last step here, we can see that 16, 16, 4, and 4 all have a common factor of 4, so I could take that out. So I'm left with negative 4 plus 4 radical 2 plus radical 5 plus radical 10. Close it, over 16. My 4 and 16 simplify, so leaving me with a final answer of negative 4 plus 4 radical 2 plus radical 5 plus radical 10 all over 4 as your final answer simplified to its max.